What's going on, guys? You guys in for a treat today. You get a double whammy from me. Welcome back in. If there are people that are just listening to this and aren't listening to the other episode, welcome to another special edition episode of the Something About Sports podcast. This is the first one of these that I'm doing, but with the NFL draft being soon, I wanted to do a special edition and give you guys just my look into some of my favorite players. A lot of these guys are going to be guys that you guys know about or have heard about for the most part. Maybe some sleeper people that I've liked that maybe other people might not be talking about. I do want to get into that. Just real quick though, go follow me at SA Sports _podcast on Instagram. You can send any inquiries to sasports913@gmail.com and then SA Sports on YouTube as well, or the Something About Sports podcast. You can also find me anywhere where you listen to podcasts as well, and you can go out there and rate me and all of that good stuff. So I do want to go ahead and get into this and give you guys some looks. So what I'm going to do is players that I know from all of these positions. I'm going to go position by position. Players that I know from these positions that I've gotten a chance to watch. I'll just say who out of those players are my favorites in this draft. Some of these will be top heavy. Some of these will be, I'll have a sleeper for every position for somebody that you may not have heard about or somebody that I've watched or I remember watching that impressed me. So I'll have that in there as well. So it's not just the top guys at each position, because we know that these guys are the top guys at each position for a reason. These are really good players. These are good prospects. There will be some shuffling around to this a little bit. Everybody's not like just the 1, 2, 3 of the top guys on the draft boards. There are some positions where I like guys that I've gotten a chance to watch more, or guys that just jumped out to me more off of the screen will maybe take a little bit more precedence over people who are the consensus evaluators. And that's just how I evaluate players. Most of the time it's just the eye test. I don't really study film on players. I haven't really studied film since playing days, really, but it's something that I may get into for the podcast later on. I won't say yes or no if that's coming down the pipeline, but it's something that I at least want to give this to. Since this was a request, I'll give some of my favorite players. I'll start with the quarterback position. My top 2 quarterbacks are a lot of people's consensus top 2 quarterbacks, but they're not the consensus top 2 quarterbacks that people are saying are going to get drafted first. But I'm really big on Trevor Lawrence. I think there's a lot of people who think that he can be a bust. I think he's really talented. I think he's really good. He's shown that enough throughout his entire playing career, even back to high school. So he's where he's supposed to be. It's one of those rare cases where you get a guy, you think about a LeBron James or players like that who they're heralded from day one, heralded from high school days all the way through college days. They become the top pick and when their career takes off. I see a similar trajectory for Trevor Lawrence. Now, as far as the success, that's going to depend on what the Jacksonville Jaguars do around him. But I think Trevor Lawrence is the best quarterback in this class. I think he's a really intriguing quarterback prospect. I think he showed a lot of different things throughout his time at Clemson to prove he's the best quarterback. He was the best quarterback coming into college. He never showed any signs of slowing down or not being that good. And he's going to be the number 1 pick in this draft. So that's an easy one. Number 2 quarterback may be controversial. I like Justin Fields, though. Justin Fields is my second favorite quarterback in this draft class. I enjoy watching him play. I think that he has a lot of elite level talent. I honestly even think that his floor may be a little bit higher than Trevor Lawrence's just because of his athleticism. And that's something that not a lot of people, you may not hear from a lot of people. I think if you get the worst case scenario from Trevor Lawrence and the worst case scenario from Justin Fields, you still have a guy in Justin Fields who can present enough of a threat as a runner that it can open up some time in passing lanes or some things like that, even if he's not great at reading the defenses, which I think that's a knock that people are putting on him. That's just not true. You've seen him thread the needle. You've seen him make elite level passes in the pocket. I think Justin Fields is a great quarterback prospect in this draft, and I think he should go over Zach Wilson. A lot of people are liking Zach Wilson. I watched Zach Wilson play a handful of times this past season, and to be honest with you, when I started seeing him being talked about as the second quarterback taken in this draft, it kind of surprised me because he never really impressed me that much. He never jumped off the screen as just a guy who I thought could be an elite level NFL quarterback. If I'm being honest, I know Mac Jones had elite talent around him, an elite offensive line, and elite defense. But Mac Jones, to me, jumped off the screen more than Zach Wilson did at times. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with being able to just throw it to the Heisman Trophy winner 10 plus times a game. But I do think that Justin Fields is the second best quarterback in this class. And I honestly don't even personally think it's close between him and Zach Wilson. I don't know enough about Trey Lance to know if he's going to be that good. I've watched some film on him. He looks like a talented player, but I haven't watched him in a game situation, and he didn't have a season last year, so I didn't get a chance to watch him in game to know, but I did get a chance to watch the rest of those guys. Those are my top two. I'll say a guy who I think is a sleeper in this, and I got to watch him, I think, more in the 2019 season than in 2020, but every time I've watched him play, he always looked good to me. His name's Zach Thomas. He's from Appalachian State. He's a very solid passer. He can make all of the throws that you want him to make. He's not going to make elite level throws, top of the line type throws, but he is an adequate passer with some mobility. He's got some escapability. He can move around a little bit. He reminded me a little bit of maybe NFL version of Alex Smith. He can move around enough, evade pressure enough, make some solid runs. He's not a guy who's going to run the pass, but he can definitely run to escape and run to save plays. He always jumped off the screen to me when I was going through quarterbacks. He was one of the guys I thought of as a sleeper, so I wanted to bring him up. He may potentially get drafted. He may not, but I'm sure he ends up getting a shot somewhere. So that's going to wrap up the quarterback position. One other thing to throw out there is that all of these different positions, they're probably going to have different numbers of players that I talk about, just because some of these positions I've watched more of these players and some of these positions I've watched less of these players. I will have more players to talk about at some positions and less players to talk about at others. So just wanted to give that preview as well. Moving on to running backs. I think everybody's consensus number one running back is Najee Harris. It's hard to argue with that. Najee Harris is an animal. He's a monster. I think he's going to be really good from day one. I think he steps in from day one as a top level NFL starting running back. That's an easy call. We all know Najee Harris is a really good player. The number two running back in this draft for me, my second favorite running back, it's kind of hard to decide, and it's between probably the consensus number two and number three running backs in the class. I've always been a big Travis Etienne fan. I've always thought he was a really good player, but getting a chance to watch Javonte Williams a lot more over this last season, I like him a lot. And even though he split time a little bit more, he was more in a backfield tandem, just the way that he can translate not only power, but finesse. He can do both. And then he can also catch. He has soft hands as well. From what I remember watching him, he has soft hands. And I guess one other point, let me step out from talking about Javonte Williams real quick. All of this stuff is coming just from my own knowledge of watching these guys play. I haven't studied any film on them. So if I say something that you guys are like, that's not really true, I'm just going off of what I remember about watching these guys. So maybe the games I watched Javonte Williams, he just happened to have good games catching the ball or, things like that. You may hear that from me a little bit, but that's kind of what I like about my podcast, is that it's not really coming from film. It's just coming from eye tests and things that I watch. So I just wanted to give that disclaimer, because I will say I probably got a chance over the last 2 years to maybe watch 5 or 6 games of North Carolina where Javonte Williams stood out to me. And in those games, he seemed like a pretty good receiver. He seemed like he could run clean routes. He seemed like he could run just about any route they wanted him to run. And he seemed like a good player. But I think the most impressive thing for me is just that, number one, I think he's less of a big play guy than Travis Etienne, which I think in the NFL, sometimes you need a grinder. So he's less of a big play guy than Travis Etienne. And then also, he can beat you multiple ways. He can run you over, he can finesse you, and he can catch the pass. So I've been leaning towards Javonte Williams being my number 2 guy over Travis Etienne, but I've just been really a big fan of Travis Etienne over his time at Clemson, that it's hard for me to supplant him. So those guys are 2 and 3 for me. I'm having trouble figuring out the order, but those are my 2 and 3 guys. And then my sleeper running backs, Chuba Hubbard from Oklahoma State. Another disclaimer, this is the first Big 12 player that I'm talking about. I'm a fan of a Big 12 team. That team should remain unnamed. No, I'll say it. I'm a Kansas Jayhawks fan first for college athletics. So I still watch KU football. I still keep up with the Big 12 football. So you guys will see probably some Big 12 bias in some of these sleepers, just off of guys that I remember watching play. I've watched more of some of these Big 12 guys than some of the other guys, maybe other sleeper type of players. So you'll see that kind of creep into some of my sleepers. But I also do have some sleepers outside of the Big 12, but I wanted to give that disclaimer if you guys are like, oh, that guy doesn't deserve to be in that list. It's just kind of my own experience in watching. Anyway, back to Chuba Hubbard. I think Chuba Hubbard's a really good player. I think he had a down year a little bit. I think he'll end up getting back to his 2019, 2018 type of form, getting back into the NFL behind a better offensive line in a system. But I really like watching him play. I think he's an intriguing football player. As far as I wanted to give a second sleeper on this one because I did have two guys that I thought were really good. My other sleeper is going to be Kylan Hill out of Mississippi State. Anytime I watch the Mississippi State play football, he always jumped off the screen to me. I think he's a really good player. He can do a little bit of both. He has a lot of athleticism. He can do a little bit of pass catching and running. He's got good tools. He looks like an NFL running back when you see him out there playing. He does. I can remember sometimes watching him dance a little bit side to side and maybe thinking that he maybe hurt the gain he could have got on a play or different things like that. But every time I watched him, he seemed like he got a lot of good yak. He was good at racking up yards after contact. And then he also could run through guys. So he jumped off the screen to me every time I watched Mississippi State play. I thought he was a good player. Mississippi State's always a team that I think they just have a lot of good NFL talent. Kylan Hill goes with that. He can get out in the flats and catch passes. He's not an elite level pass catcher, but I do think I remember him catching a few passes and being able to do some things in space with them. So that's my other sleeper from the running back position. That's not like a top 10 prospect or anything like that I remember watching play. Wide receiver is an exciting position in this draft, because not only are the top guys good, but you got a lot of guys from the top down that are really good. This is probably the sleeper I'm most excited about when I get to him. Two of the top three guys in this draft are Ja'Marr Chase and DeVonta Smith. Those are my two top guys. Just from what I saw from Ja'Marr Chase in 2019, it's hard for me to, even with the Heisman level season that DeVonta Smith had, the size that Ja'Marr Chase has and the way that he can use his size and the hands that he has, it's hard for me to supplant him off atop the top of this draft. I think if he would have been able to come out in 2019, he probably would have been the first wide receiver taken in that draft. I think he was that good. And of course, that worked out good for Justin Jefferson that he wasn't able to come out, because we all saw what Justin Jefferson did. But to think that Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase were college teammates just lets you know how good that LSU offense was and why they won the national championship and why Joe Burrow was able to have a historic type of season. Ja'Marr Chase, athletic freak, big guy, really good player. I'm excited to watch him play. I think he's a plug-and-play day one wide receiver. DeVonta Smith, I think he's a plug-and-play day one wide receiver as well, but not because of his physical tools. I think he's just going to outclass people. I think he can, and of course Antonio Brown started a little bit different. I can see him being an Antonio Brown type of mode player where he's not going to be the biggest guy. He's not going to be the fastest guy. He just can beat you. He's just a better receiver than you are a defender, and he can beat you. And I think that's the future that I see for DeVonta Smith. I think he'll end up having a better pro career than Jalen Waddle. I really like DeVonta Smith a lot. He used to jump out off of the screen even before he was the guy at Alabama. If you guys remember, in 2019, DeVonta Smith, I believe, was like the number 3 option in that offense. And he still would jump off the screen just because he was always fast. He always seemed fast. He always seemed like he could run good routes. And I thought he was always a good player in that offense. That was just an elite group of talent that they had in that offense. When you talk about him, you talk about Jalen Waddle, and then you talk about, why am I drawing a blank? Ruggs. Why am I forgetting that? So you think about DeVonta Smith, Henry Ruggs, and Jalen Waddle as a trio of wide receiver options. That's a really good tandem. And I think DeVonta Smith got overshadowed at that time. But now this year with Jalen Waddle having that injury, it allowed him to show what he could do. And he eventually won the Heisman, which I thought was well-deserved. I think those two are going to be the top 2 guys. If I had to pick guys from the top 5 prospects and things like that, those are my 2 favorites. My sleeper at this position is Rondale Moore out of Purdue. Rondale Moore is probably my favorite college football player to watch over the last 2 years. I think he's just electric. It doesn't seem like anybody on the field can keep up with him, even in the Big Ten. And he's just always jumped off the screen. I think the very first time I remember noticing Rondale Moore, it was actually against Ohio State in 2018, I believe. And he had a monster game against them. And from then on, I was a fan. And every time I could watch Purdue and figure out a way to get to watch their games, I always watched for him in general. And the dude always impressed me every single time, whether it was in the short passing game, whether it was catching long passes, whether it was as a returner. He can just change the trajectory of a game with one touch. And I think that he's going to be a really good NFL receiver probably an elite level NFL talent when you talk about the other things he can bring to the table, like returning. And I think he can step in from day one and be a good player because he also has some strength about him and some size about him. I'm excited to see where this goes with Rondale Moore because I think he's a really good talent. I know that a lot of people are talking about him being a second round type of player. So we'll see where he ends up getting drafted at. I would love for the Chiefs to get him in the second round, but he's just too redundant to what the Chiefs have on their roster already. But I don't think anybody would be upset with getting him on their team. And if your team drafts him and you don't know who he is and you go look at his highlight really quick that your team got a good player and you guys got a steal of a player, I think he's going to be one of the best receivers out of this draft class. All right, so that'll wrap up the wide receiver position for me. But let me go ahead and move to tight end. There's no surprise on who the top tight end in this class is, and I think that he's the best tight end that I've seen come out of the draft in a little while as far as just a top end prospect, and that's going to be Kyle Pitts. I think the tight end position, there's going to be some copycat with trying to find that next Travis Kelce or the next George Kittle, and Kyle Pitts is more from the Travis Kelce mode in that he's just super athletic. He's pretty much a wide receiver, just in a big frame. He's going to be able to beat matchups with both linebackers and defensive backs because of his athleticism. And so I think he's from that mode, and that's why teams are valuing a guy like him. And I think he's going to be a really good NFL tight end. He's my number one guy. My second guy, he's probably the only other guy in the top prospect range that I've actually gotten a chance to watch a little bit, and that was Brevin Jordan. And Brevin Jordan's a little bit kind of not as good as a Kyle Pitts, but he's actually also an athletic guy as well. He's going to be able to make some plays. He made plays when I was watching Miami. He jumps off the screen from a size perspective and an athleticism perspective. I don't think he's going to have the speed or the agility to beat guys like a Kyle Pitts would, but he was one of the guys that I saw as a productive guy, and I thought he was really good at tight end. And I remember watching him play a decent amount, enough to know that he was a good player. My sleeper at this position, and he's probably a sleeper for a lot of people because Notre Dame's a team that a lot of people will watch. But Tommy Tremble, I think he's a really good player as well. And Notre Dame always has a good stable of tight ends. I think they had just 3 on their team last year that all were really good. So they do have a good stable of tight ends, but he always jumped off because he seemed like a good blocker. They kept him in line as a blocker a decent amount, but he also was athletic enough in the open space to where it jumped through the screen. I think he's a sleeper at the position. I think he'll be a good player as well if he gets to the right system. I'm kind of cheating with this one because I want to see the Chiefs draft Tommy Tremble. So I'm just putting it out there in the world. And maybe the Chiefs go after a guy like Tommy Tremble and have a second tight end where you can get a guy who can inline block as well and help out in situations like the Super Bowl where the offensive line might not be quite up to par. But that's going to be it for the tight end position. I want to go ahead and move to offensive line. So I didn't do tackle and guard. I just went ahead and did, or tackle and interior, I guess is kind of what they're called nowadays. I just went ahead and did one offensive lineman from each of those categories and then my sleeper as well. My favorite offensive lineman that I watched personally and paid attention to this past year is Christian Darrisaw out of Virginia Tech. He's just a mauler of a player. He's gonna be out there trying to bully people, knock people over. He just plays with this mean streak that you like to see from an offensive tackle. And he's got he reminds me in the running blocking. It's kind of like Trent Williams, who also plays with the mean streak. But of course, Christian Darrisaw, I don't know if he'll ever get to Trent Williams level, but I think he's my favorite offensive tackle coming out of this class just because of that nastiness he plays with, that mean streak he plays with. And that always stood out to me when watching him play in college. And then my favorite guard coming out, he's from the same mode, and I think he's probably one of the more higher ranked interior guards or interior offensive linemen, and that's Elijah Vera Tucker from USC. I just remember watching them play, and him also being a mauler of a player, a guy who's gonna go out there and try to bully people, and he really can beat even guys who are more athletic than him. I think that was something that I also notice about Elijah Vera Tucker that maybe I didn't notice about some of the other linemen when I pay attention to the line is that if guys were a little bit faster than him, got a first step on him and things like that, he was pretty good at still making sure he got a hand on him, at still making sure he at least got a block on him. That was probably one of the main things that stood out to me. But he also plays the game with that nastiness that you like to see from an offensive lineman. And then for my obligatory Big 12 bias pick, and that's going to be Adrian Ealy out of Oklahoma. I remember watching him play. He's also in a similar mode. He was an all Big 12 level player, really good player. Started all of the games for OU last year at tackle, and he always stood out to me when I got a chance to watch OU play over the last couple of years. He's going to be my sleeper there. I think he can be a solid contributor in the NFL for years to come on the offensive line. Adrian Ealy's his name. You may hear his name down the road or see him playing and say, I remember hearing about him on the podcast with Leon. That's my sleeper guy on the offensive line. I did defensive line the same way I did the offensive line, with just the way that I wanted to look at the positions. I didn't do interior and edge. I just went ahead and did everybody together and picked one of each. I actually have two edge players that always look good to me, but my first one's going to be Kwity Paye. He's going to be a lot of people's number one player out of this. He just goes and goes. He's one of those guys, when you watch the beginning of the game and you watch at the end of the game, he just keeps going. And then also, even just throughout plays, he's relentless as far as if the quarterback holds the ball long enough, he's going to get there. I really like watching Kwity Paye. He seems like he's got the body type to be an NFL edge. He's going to be able to stand up to that. He seems like an athletic freak, really, when you look at him without pads on as well. Kwity Paye is probably my favorite guy coming out of this draft. I know he's not a lot of people's number one player as far as an edge player, but I think he would be my number one if I was doing an official ranking. And then the other guy out of this that's a more top guy in the class as far as an edge rusher that I personally remember getting to watch was Carlos Basham. Carlos Basham is a freak athlete as well. Like Kwity Paye, you guys will notice that I have a certain type of player at a lot of these positions that kind of stands out to me a little bit more. And Basham's going to be more of like an explosive guy, relentless type of player as well. He could play. I feel like I remember him moving inside and outside when I got a chance to watch him play. I hope I'm not mistaking him for somebody else, but I do feel like I remember him moving around just a little bit. And so I think that his speed as well off the edge was something that jumped out to me. So he's a player that I like. When I saw him as one of the higher rated guys in this class, I immediately recognized him and remembered his name out of Wake Forest and knew he was going to be a player. So I wanted to bring him up in this as well. As far as interior lineman, another guy out of the top players, Christian Barmore. I think Christian Barmore's coming out of Alabama. He's also a bully type of player, as you guys have heard me say a few times in this now, but I think Alabama has a little bit of a bias. It's easy to fall in love with players from Alabama because you watch them so much. But as an interior type of player, you see him, he's a guy who plays with a lot of strength as well. He's a guy who can take up blocks. He can really push the pocket back in the from the middle of the offensive line, and then also stuff up running lane. I think he's going to be a really good defensive tackle coming out of this class. And then my sleeper from this, again, another obligatory Big 12 pick, is going to be Darius Stills. And he's another one of these guys. He's out of West Virginia. I didn't say his college, but he's another one of these guys that he can just plays with the mean streak, and he never stops coming at you. Darius Stills is going to keep coming and keep coming. I think he was a conference player of the year level player. Last season was so weird that I think he ended up on the second team, if I'm not mistaken, in the Big 12. But he always jumped out to me anytime I got a chance to watch West Virginia play. West Virginia wasn't as good of a team as last year as they have been recently, but he's a really good player. He has NFL pedigree as well. His dad played in the NFL. I think he's going to be a good NFL player, somebody who can be a solid contributor in the right situation. Moving on to linebacker in this draft. I think probably the chance to be the best defensive player in this draft, but the best linebacker hands down is going to be Micah Parsons out of Penn State. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. Micah Parsons is a crazy athlete. He can run around sideline to sideline across the field. If you watch him play and you got a chance to watch him blitz, it's the thing of beauty. The way he attacks the blitzing lanes and gets after the quarterback as a blitzer. I see Micah Parsons stepping in from day one and being a productive NFL linebacker. Quite frankly, I wish the Chiefs were in the range to draft him, but he'll be long gone by the time the Chiefs get a chance to make a selection. I think if I had to pick right now, I would probably say Micah Parsons is the best defensive player in this draft. I'm really high on Micah Parsons. I think he's going to be a superstar linebacker in the NFL. He just has all the tools to be that, and I enjoy watching him play this year. He jumps off the screen to you when you watch him play. Another guy who's a borderline top guy is Jabril Cox. I also enjoy watching him play from LSU. I think he has a few more limitations than Micah Parsons, but I wasn't able to watch some of the other top guys, and Jabril Cox is one that I did get get a chance to watch, he at least stood out to me as a tackler, as an inline linebacker. He seems like he understands the game. He can play the game. There's a name that's been coming up around Kansas City, and of course, he's from Mizzou, so that's why. But Nick Bolton, he's a guy who's more towards the top of the list as well. I'm not super familiar with him, but I do know that hearing that name a lot and then seeing him as one of the top prospects from the position, I at least thought I should put it out there in case the Chiefs do make a move and try to figure out a way to get him on the team. My sleeper, another Big 12 guy, Joseph Asai. Joseph Asai is an outside linebacker, also another really good player. I think he actually might be one of the higher rated guys. I just haven't heard a lot of talk around Joseph Asai so far in this draft process. A lot of people talk about it, but he's another athletic guy, quick guy, really good player as well. He can actually rush the passer pretty good. He's a bigger guy, so he probably is going to be more of like an outside linebacker type of player. But either way, I think he'll be a productive player in the right situation. And I thought that he was probably a little underrated in this draft just because of playing in the Big 12, number one, playing at Texas, who didn't really have a defense you would expect them to have and have it for a little while. But I think he'll be a good player. He'll probably be a round 1 through 3 type of pick. I mean, if there's a run that goes on outside linebackers early, he may even go earlier. We'll see what all happens with him, but I like him as a player as well. I enjoy getting to watch him play. And then defensive back. I did the same thing with defensive back, but defensive back is a little bit different because out of the top guys, the only one I really remember other than like highlights, but I remember watching in the Florida game is Patrick Surtain. He's a good player. Surtain is a guy who you don't really hear about a lot, which is good because he's just a cover guy. He doesn't get beat very often. I do remember a game, I believe they were playing against Tennessee, and I can't remember this receiver's name, and I think he's also in the draft as well. There was a receiver for Tennessee who every time I watched him play, he also was really good. I'll have to think of his name and add his name in here later because I want to make sure he gets his due because I think he'll be a good player as well. He probably won't get drafted very high, but he didn't have good quarterback play. But I think that guy got a little bit of the better of him. He's a bigger frame, so that may be something to watch with Patrick Surtain is a guys with bigger frames, seeing how he does against them. But I really don't see a whole lot of weaknesses. I think he's going to be a really good covered cornerback in the NFL for a long time to come. He's going to be the best D-back out of this draft, most likely. A couple of the sleepers of players that I remember watching. I have 2 sleepers for this because the top guys, I'm just not as well versed in those top guys. I didn't get a chance to watch a lot of those guys play in college. They're not going to be one of my other top people. But some of the other guys that I liked out of this class, one guy who I really liked, and I only got a chance to watch him play a couple of times, but Tariq Thompson out of San Diego State, the dude is a baller. Every time I got a chance to watch him play, I believe I got a chance to watch him play in both of the last 2 seasons. But he's a safety. He plays up to the line of scrimmage a decent amount. He's not the biggest guy, or even he doesn't really seem like the fastest guy, but he just seems like he knows how to play the game. He always jumped off the screen to me. He was always where he needed to be around the ball, making good plays. He always seemed like he was pretty good in coverage, even though he didn't seem like he had great straight line speed. He always seemed like he was pretty good in coverage, and I always liked what I saw from him. So I'm excited to see where he ends up. I think he could be a mid-round guy who ends up being a sleeper. And then there was one other guy as well from the defensive back position that I wanted to talk about. And his name's Andre Cisco out of Syracuse, another safety that also is really good that I remember watching play. There's not a lot of, sometimes you just get into those things where you watch a game to fill the time until the next primetime game or the next main game you want to watch. And you sometimes stumble across a player that's really good. And Andre Cisco stood out to me as a safety. I thought he was really good. I believe a little bit more so than Thompson. I remember him playing a little bit more deep safety, being a little bit more of a kind of a back end guy, but still stood out to me as a player, seemed like he was around the ball, seemed like he was good instinctually as a safety as well. And those are my defensive backs from this draft. And those are just the people that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to give this quick little draft special with my favorite players because it was requested of me, and that's going to wrap that up. I appreciate you guys that are listening to this. Don't hold me to some of this. Like I said before, this is all based off of just my chance of getting to watch him. I didn't watch film on any of these guys. I didn't go back and study really any of these guys. I just went off of memory of what I remembered about them, which is why I skipped a lot of the top guys at some of these positions, because I just didn't have enough knowledge of them, enough memory of watching them play. So the guys that I remember watching play are the guys that I highlighted. And then my sleepers are guys that really stood out to me of players at those positions. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope this gives you another wrinkle of things to look for in the draft. And if you guys have any other inquiries, any other requests, don't hesitate to reach out on the Instagram page, SA Sports_podcast. You can comment on the YouTube channel as well, SA Sports or something about sports podcast, or even my email address, sasports913@gmail.com. I appreciate you guys that continue to listen, that continue to support, and I'll have more content coming for you guys soon. So until next time.